Broad notes, I don't give catch signals because I like taking notes, so please time yourselves. And if you talk after 17, I won't be listening, so just don't get talking. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Alright. That is.
I was indeed.
Okay. That's everyone, so PM, whenever ready, go for it.
Shoot. Wait, do I speak into this?
Microphone.
Oh, okay. Alright, so can I record my own speech while we are also recording my speech?
Sure.
I sure hope you say yes. Okay. Okay, is everyone ready? Am I good to start? Starting in 3, 2, 1. Factory farming is our generation's moral atrocity. Every day, millions of chickens are shredded alive in order to make sure that we have enough meat to eat. And vigilante attacks are the only way by which we can disrupt the passivity that people feel towards this issue, raise awareness enough such that we can get actual change to make sure the lives of animals are less in suffering. So what do we think vigilante attacks actually looks like? As stated in the Discord, these are like bombings, shootings, sabotage of farms. We don't think these necessarily have to be targeted at the animals themselves. It could look like bombing the infrastructure of like a caging or processing area for dead chickens, sabotaging the existing machinery that allows for like milk to be milked out of cows and things like that. I think this will likely be done by animal advocacy movements and social justice movements. And I think this can accompany existing efforts that are already being done in the status quo, such as, for instance, We Animals currently does photojournalist attempts to expose the inner atrocities of factory farming. We think we are able to, let's say, do things like vigilante attacks that then accompany things like information gathering, such as being able to get into the systems, take pictures, expose the atrocities that are happening inside. First, two things. First, why we think this is going to work. Secondly, why alternatives are too passive or can't work. Secondly, why this will not result in mass public backlash against animal activists. And fourthly, why we think at the very least, this slows down factory farming operations such that more animals can survive. On first, why do we think this will work? The way vigilante attacks work is they use violence or use like kind of very gruesome news or things like damage in order to make big splashes in the news. Very intuitively, people are emotionally drawn to like big atrocities, whether that's like a burning building in the news, whether that's acts of violence that are committed, whether that's something very extreme, right? This grabs people's emotional attention. This is why, for instance, news about the Israel-Palestine conflict is so attention-grabbing to us, because we're like this type of violence that's happening, this type of destruction that's happening easily captures our attention. If you contrast this with how these types of awareness are being spread in the status quo, which is just a picture of how animals are tortured, this is something that often like naturally gets washed out with other news about more pressing human violent issues, with other things that naturally grab people's attention. So what we think first happened then is when vigilante attacks happen more frequently, more people are drawn to the news every time it happens. And journalists, in interest of covering the entire story, are likely to at least explain first when this attack happens, second the actual incentives behind the attack. So yes, opposition might say they might cover this in the most extremist way, such as like crazy animal advocates do crazy things. But I think fundamentally they will expose the idea of the reason this is being done is because this is being done by the animal advocacy movement, because they want to expose the factory farming that's happening inside. Here is the evidence that they've presented in order to show why this has happened. This is the message they put on social media, etc. And finally, I think I want to note the vast majority of actors that are likely to do this are also likely to push a reasonable message alongside it. This is for a few reasons. I think the average social justice movement activist probably their end goal is to increase awareness of factory farming such that policies get better to some extent. So they know that the best ability to access change is likely not to overthrow factory farming overnight because of the large intensity of the meat industry. This is literally not possible. There's too much GDP bound up in this industry. So as a result, a lot of the actors are likely to want to put forward policy demands at the end of an attack like this that are relatively reasonable, such as rather than wanting the end of factory farming tomorrow, that is fundamentally what we want. want, but right now we want pigs to stop being held in gestation crates that are too small for them to move. Right now we want chickens that are cage-free and are able to move around. Right now we want you to start working a genetic modification such that you no longer have to shred baby male chickens in order to save on costs. Like, these types of very reasonable, relatively low cost, like achievable demands that the meat industry can comply to with not as much change to their bottom margin. I think these are the types of policies that these types of actors are likely to put forward every time they do an attack like this and explain the rationale behind their attack. But even if it is done in the most bad way, such as the Just Stop Oil way, where they take the most extreme stance, I think coupled with other attacks of groups that are likely to be more reasonable in their messaging, the clear message gets out that factory farming is bad and is unethical. And this mobilizes public attention enough such that we're able to get incremental change. So this, coupled with more reasonable attempts, the overall Overton window shifts towards, guys, factory farming should not happen in this way anymore. There are ways to improve it. We need to stop this, right? Here's why alternatives are too passive or can't work. I think the first thing is that industry pressure is erasing existing legal alternatives for backlash. For instance, large farms are lobbying for increased enforcements of what's called ag-gag laws, which in the status quo protect photojournalists that want to cover the atrocities of factory farming. A lot of large farms that are increasingly gaining in economic influence because of the fact that they're like so big, because of the fact that like politicians like people don't like have as much awareness. These types of farms are lobbying against these types of laws. So a lot of the existing legal ways by which we build awareness are already being erased. And I think other ways are able also to be lobbied by the existing industry, which is why we need to go through as extreme of a stance as vigilante attacks by people who are willing to be arrested for it, for people who are willing to break the rules. Why do we think this won't result in mass public backlash against animal activists? Polls have shown that people in principle don't support factory farming, which is, a lot of polls say if we were able to like snap your fingers and make sure animals weren't treated in this way, a lot of people say they will. So why do people eat meat? The only reason they do is for two reasons. First, because of ignorance. They generally don't know how animals are being treated, and as a result, they feel like, oh, you know, they're just like in that picture, the chickens are running around happily. That is the way my chicken is being treated when they're not. Secondly, it is the lack of everyday thought. So even if they know that they're being treated properly, it's hard to connect that with the delicious animal on your plate. So why do we think we fix this in vigilante attacks? Before that, POI from closing.
Yeah, honestly, I just think that when there's extreme actions that happen, typically there's a lot of discourse about the justification of those actions themselves. So Just Stop Oil created a lot of attention on spilling oil on the Mona Lisa instead of...
Yes, but the discourse itself is what gets this issue into the mainstream attention. As I've pointed out, the issue right now is this issue isn't being discussed at all. Only human issues are being considered. People don't have discussions about should we treat animals better when there's so many other pressing issues in the way. So even if it is an extreme way, the fact that we get this issue into public discourse and debate means we start a discussion about, one, why is that, the fact that this pain is happening in the first place, right? When animal activists are able to show this pain, explain the rationale, people think, oh shit, this is actually happening. This helps with the ignorance that some people have about the way that these animals are being treated. Two, I think you're able to get this into the consciousness of everyday thought. That is, an increase in vigilante attacks presumably means these attacks are happening once a month, couple times a year. So the issue attention cycles that we're able to cover in the news are such that every time people see this again in the news, they're like, oh shit, the meat I am eating is connected to the meat that is being processed in these factory farms. The more times it appears in the news, the more time people are able to have relative mental, it stays within their mental consciousness, and they're able to connect that to things like signing petitions, to things like taking action that the animal activists tell them to. For these reasons, proud to propose.
May or may not take POIs. If I don't take a POI, my second speaker can take two. Don't worry, guys. Don't check the manual. Don't check the manual. Don't do it. Okay. Oh man, I don't have Coke, so my mouth is so dry. It's so over. Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. First, don't be fooled by government's very visceral imagery, right? People like me. Discourse is not press lifestyle change. I can talk about animals all I want here, but I'm not vegetarian, I'm not vegan. The discourse, however, on the contrary, discourse on why violence is bad uniquely in the public sphere makes people not want to be vegan or buy into the vegan movement because that is something that is inside the public sphere, right? I think first, two pieces of characterization on factory farm. Number one is factory farming has high fixed costs. This looks like large industries buying into this. This is to say, decision makers are likely elites who are not affected by this individual bombing, right? Like you have one bombing incident and like 500 of your like industry plants like being like harmed. At least you have the power to change procedural policy and to change whether or not this happened in the first place. Are not going to fucking care who they want profit, right? They have to account to their shareholders. They have the constant like incessant incentive to like want to suck like shareholder cost. Let's be so for real. I think the second part is that like in the status quo, there's already existing sympathy towards these vegan or like the animal ethics movements, right? In status quo, it's like politically viable to do things like support the vegan movement, like through protests, through like the development of vegan options, through like participating in NGOs, donating to like organizations. But I think that insofar as like you have a sensationalization of these attacks, this is going to be characteristic or seen as a characteristic of the vegan movement, right? Now that people who buy into the vegan movement will now be shamed by their friends who are most likely centrist, because that's the most dominant political view, for supporting this, right? Like veganism and like animal welfare movement becomes stigmatized because it's become linked optically to violence through social media, through media that sensationalizes these as government says, right? The political right and pundits probably like rail against this like crazy, right? The tipping point is that like insofar as you decide whether or not you're being vegan or not being vegan, you see the violence and you stray away from violence because people are naturally afraid of violence, right? They don't want to opt into a movement that is associated with violence. They don't want to look like they support violence, right? Because this is like politically unpopular, but also like in your social circles, it makes you unpopular. I think government said there's no like viable solution like in like status quo. I think like there's like viable things like NGOs do things, but also like there's the growth of the plant alternative industries, right? So they say like lobbying is like very like unsolvable and they're trying to like gain power, like factory farming is trying to like consolidate power or something. I think that there's a growth of like the meat alternative industry, like like the vegan burger at A&W, right? It's saying that there's probably an increase of lobbying insofar as there's meat alternative options being developed by corporate. I think that corporations can now compete against each other, like lobby against each other. I think there's success, like there's growing deterrence against like corporate hegemony in this sense, right? I think that two reasons why these attacks are extremely harmful. Number one, this is sort of like the most radical of advocates who have like the intention to do harm. Like most people are scared of committing violence. So I think this is probably like the most radical people who probably have the lack of training, right? This is like weapons like Molotov, like handmade explosives. This is probably like too like the intention is to sensationalize. This is like the point, right? So it's like OG's best cases they attack the machines, but this is also linked to places like offices or like places where animals live, right? But like in OG's best case, OG says like these animals are not going to be free. Unsure how, but these animals are going to die on both sides of the house, right? This is like the reason why animals die on both sides of the house, or like these places actually lead to more animal deaths, is because that like when you bomb like these machines, it's probably gonna hit it's probably unintentionally hit like a place where like the animals are like being like housed, right? So it's like maybe like you want to like break these like pigs out of a cage, you break the cage and then like they start like running like they can run across the road and they can run by a truck, right? Like I don't know, like there's no like path to survival for the animal. Like, so I think the delta here is I think OG harmed more potentially humans, more animals, also private property. The principle here for turf burning is that you're intentionally committing harm, right? And so far as you're intentionally committing harm to individuals, private property, to animals, Locke says actively inciting harm puts you in a state of war with people. This is morally condemnable because you disrupt public order, like you consciously disrupt public order for your own good. Like, this is selfish. I think this is very, very terrible, morally condemnable. I think that the reason that there's no delta, or this is actually the flip for why people buy out of movements in the first place, or like these animal ethics movements, is that fear is actually not a deterrent. I think that the first reason for why a good movement is just animal ethics movement loses support is because it's just hard to mobilize future animal ethics movements insofar as you lose buy-in because you now link this notion of like veganism or like supporting supporting like animal ethics to violence, right? Like sure, yeah, what's up?
Do you think it would have been ethical to bomb a concentration camp back in the Nazi days in order to save the people that were inside and disrupt the operation?
That is not analogous. What the fuck? I don't know, man. I think the point here is we want solvency insofar as we want more people to buy into the movement. Right? We want more people to write letters to their politicians, telling them to change legislation, to work for meat alternative industries, to counteract the lobbying that is happening in status quo, right? We want people to we want human capital inside these movements. But this human capital, advocates or activists buy out insofar as there's a strong narrative that these actions are lawless and evil. And these actions are lawless and evil in and of itself because they are committing harm, right? You're harming private property. You're doing things that is perceived as radical. in status quo, political violence is not like a viable political option. This is seen as very bad. People see Capitol Hill as bad, right? Like this is obviously terrible. So people, I think, individually, like people who like eat meat, buy out, like are less likely to go vegan and they don't want to be associated with this. Also, there's less like political mobilization because you're scared of this. You're scared of being associated with the most radical vegan people. I think that because it's a very extremely unpopular support violence, the most passionate advocates in the movement that they care about, they want to reduce harm. Now see that more harm being committed in their own movement. They're more likely to buy out now because they this goes against the principles of not committing harm. You don't commit harm to animals, so you start committing harm to animals. You now break these cages, and now these pigs get run over by cars, right? Or you destroy private property, and you think at least they can be fed for they can at least be fed for a number of days before they're made slaughtered. If they just get they get released into the wild, they suffer under climate. It's I think it's bad on both sides, but I think it's worse insofar as they're actively perpetrating these harms, right? I think the other thing is I think that government's margin is very thin because again, elites don't actually change practices because there is an incessant profit incentive, but also there's a lot of money in these corporations, meaning you can take measures against this, right? You can bulk up your security. You can hire security guards and bulk up your infrastructure. You can outsource to Mongolia or something, right? But the third is sensationalization loses traction. So it's if you think this is attention grabbing, it's gonna get less attention grabbing over time. While violence becomes a norm, so you're committing violence for reduced attention capital. This is terrible because this is just very, very it affects animals, it affects people. I think that impacting here is number one, if you buy and you destroy factory farms to some extent, I think or outsource, it means a lower supply of meat, right? Government never proves change in lifestyle. They just say, violence means that people discuss it more. This changes their lifestyle. But again, we have told you why people have an aversion of violence, right? People still like meat, and also McDonald's still buys meat, right? For their burgers, right? Corporations are just going to now raise living costs for the average individual. This is probably very bad, but also this means there's going to be more empathy for owners of factory farm, meaning more support for factory farm owners. This is probably really bad too.
GPM, interrupt you.
My time starts now. Panel side opposition's argument about bombing these or shooting down these factory farms being morally condemnable does not suffice for the zone insofar as the very actions that these vigilantes are lobbying against are already extremely morally condemnable actions in the status quo that is not getting nearly the amount of awareness initiative in the status quo. Very proud to propose. So what am I going to be doing for you today? First, full-on refutation of what opposition is saying, which will lead to rebuilding of my partner's points, which will also include some extensions about how we are saving more animals in the status quo in our new world, and also how we are also encouraging other initiatives at the same time. So first of all, what is side opposition telling us? They are telling us about how all this how about all this awareness, all this violence is actually going to stigmatize the movement, and people aren't going to want to be associated with veganism or vegetarianism because it is those groups that are causing that much violence. We don't think this point stands insofar as because all of this violence is happening is to counteract another form of mass violence that is happening. We think because these mass violent acts are creating awareness into what these factory farms are doing, the kind of violence that is and psychological and physical violence that is happening to these animals. We think the stigmatization is significantly less because of these vigilante effects, because people are also aware of the moral implications of continuing their meat eating practices, of supporting these factory farms. We think it's so much more difficult for people to continue this lifestyle even if they might disapprove of the initial violence, because it is violence against violence that is already happening. But what are they also telling us? They're telling us about how large fixed costs on factory farms, how elites are not elites are not actually affected by this. We have two responses to this. First of all, we don't actually think this is entirely true. On our side of the house, we want to see increased vigilante attacks, which means we want to see increased impact on these factory farms. We think sabotaging these farms, bombing them, shooting them, is still going to be a profit drains on these farms. We think people are still being affected by the very nature that you're taking away. You're attacking these assets, you're attacking these like cash flow for these people. But second of all, we're telling you that this kind of pressure actually works. Like this kind of pressure actually works. The difference is in the status quo when environmental groups are putting pressure on these farms and like some sort of changes are being made, they're eventually being taken back. That's why we haven't seen actual significant changes on this side. On our side, when you make something more violent, you're putting far more public pressure on these far more public pressure on these initiatives, we are able to make them stick, and we can tell you why. I'll take a POI before that.
Yeah, so the province of Ontario consumes about 500 million metric tons of milk a month. Can you explain how we produce our milk otherwise?
Can you repeat the final part?
How would we produce enough milk to sustain demand otherwise?
Okay, well, First of all, there is ethical farming practices. Like, we don't actually think you need to torture cows to like create a lot of milk, okay? And second of all, we think through this, when you create awareness, we also hope to decrease demand. We also hope people exercise more caution. Like, thank you very much, okay? But finally, what is opposition telling us about how you have other alternatives? You have NGOs, you have vegan options, etc., etc. Here is why other alternatives aren't going to work as well. Part of what my partner says, first of all, people are drawn to violence. That is just how it is. There is not going to be as much like media attention on wars if we weren't actually aware of the kind of mass starvation, the pain, the suffering that these people are going through. That is what is attracting us to the issue and getting us to talk about it. But second of all, even taking side opposition at their best and talking about bad discourse, we still tell you that bad discourse, bad discourse to some extent is still relevant discourse insofar as even when criticizing these acts of violence, you have to be inherently aware of what that violence is going towards. You have to be aware of why this is happening in the first place. We think if we can get more people to talk, even if we get people to say, oh, this violence is bad, if we are getting them to talk about factory farms, we think that is better than what's happening in the status quo. We think that's valuable in and of itself. Thirdly, this idea of everyday awareness, because why is it so hard specifically when it comes to the meat industry, the dairy industry, and this idea of veganism? Because this is related to food. This is ingrained in every part of people's lives, in their lifestyles, in their diets, in their culture, etc. All other ways of alternatives isn't going to work in the sense that we can't have people think about these issues during non-crucial moments of their life. Like, let's talk about one alternative that exists on OpSite of like putting pictures of these farms on this these meat packages, which A, don't happen nearly enough in the status quo we would like, and B, are difficult to happen because of what my partner says about these farms lobbying against photographic releasing. But let's say that's an alternative that exists. Somebody seeing that picture has still made the choice to go to the grocery store. They have the plan to buy the meat. It's a crucial moment where they're not going to go back on their lifestyle choices because, no thank you, they made a whole, because they have a whole idea, their day, their week that centers around making a significant choice. We think when we're sending a grand message, we're getting people to think about these issues on non-crucial parts of their life. We're getting them to be more aware about what their lifestyle is, to be able to kind of rethink their choice, be more aware of their choices at moments where they aren't being inclined to still make those choices anyways because their mind has already been set. That's the choice they have to make. But fourth of all, on our side of the house, we are actually saving more animals because side opposition wants to tell you that animal casualties. Animals still die on their side of the house. Animals go through far much torture and far more painful death on their side of the house. Even if we have some animal casualties, in the act of sabotaging and shooting and such, there's still animals being set free in our scenario. At the very end, we are still saving a lot more animals on our side of the house than theirs, even if we take anything they say at their best. That is why we're proud to propose.
Water minutes.
True.
Can I get some water?
I guess.
I haven't drank since. I don't know.
No idea.
I know.
What does that mean?
It is actually sad. That is actually the case.
I'm not gonna make but I understand.
Oh, I would love to offer you a POI. I will give you a POI at 1 minute 30.
No, I said, dude, you
She's
better.
already spoken. Well, give it.
No,
She's
I
spoken.
said I would
I'll take your POI, sure.
Okay, bro.
Give her an opportunity.
This is not what you said.
What are they gonna say? They're gonna say like deranged shit? That's
Come on,
not
Sherry.
Come on, Sherry, our case is so deranged. You're gonna hate it.
Oh no, you're gonna love it. I think you're
I'm pretty sure.
Is it gonna be like 7 minutes of white animals doing that?
No. It's even better.
It's slightly better than that. Although I tried to think of how to run that.
I spent 10 minutes of convincing Edward to run this extension.
I gave in at about 13:50, and I started running this, and then I had to go to the washroom because I was too far from listening.
Alright.
You're just
He spent 10 minutes trying to convince me to run this, and I could not go to the washroom for that 10 minutes after I had to go away.
Not flattering, by the way.
understandable how you do it.
Oh, I can't right at OG, that's crazy.
Alright, yeah, whenever you're ready.
Yep, alright. Alright. Three, two, one. OG's logic is that more spectacle is good to convince people. But panel, if I shit on the side of the road as a form of protest, I'm really unsure why people would think what I have to say makes sense, or if they just think I'm gonna be fucking crazy and they should put me in jail. Proud to oppose. So, re-summarizing our case, because this is actually incredibly simple. The thesis of OG is that people do not like political violence or property violence, and there's so many reasons for this. They're like coming out of my fucking asshole. First, I want to there are significant narratives about non-violent protests being bad that the average person just believes in this. Why? Because people like stability. The idea of property damage or violent protest tends to raise people's risks for themselves, and people therefore even if they sympathize with the cause, insofar as they now view maybe their lives or their well-being or maybe even their house or whatever at risk, they now back out. Second, it looks like it's just like antisocial behavior insofar as it looks like you are like potentially putting other people's lives at risk in the first place. This makes sense. But third, I want to flag here, a lot of people don't even already agree with you in the first place. OG's logic maybe works insofar as people are fucking buy in there and are incredibly radical, right? As much I believe that what they say, that people, a lot of people are sympathetic to the vegan movement. But I want to flag here that that's not everyone and that's not even a majority yet. So I just want panel to imagine what it looks like when some dude who does eat meat in the first place now sees someone go blow up a factory farm. I'm not sure it's going to be really good. So, end impacts on OG. Basically, they probably do this badly. These people have no arms training, and I'm going to discuss this later. But second, it's probably the most radical activists who do this. As far as most of the activist people in the environmental movement who are moderate probably don't fucking like this. Don't fucking have a lot of hesitance against violence, and this probably means the base looks at you really bad. A lot of people think you're really crazy, and this probably means you probably get portrayed crazy by the media, and this probably means politicians who are majoritarian and want to appeal to the lowest common denominator in their base to get more votes now are much less willing to actually support you. I think the likely counterfactual here is probably that you get, non-violent protests or something. Because one, I want to flag the majority of the activists in the vegan or environmental movement probably don't like violence. There are significant narratives about why nonviolent protest is really, really based. And I also want to flag here that OG literally admits that, like, yeah, there's a lot of support for, like, the environmental movement right now. And, like, if this is true, I'm not sure why nonviolent protest is not going to fucking achieve the same effect, where it's able to, I don't know, galvanize support for people. But more importantly, you don't look insane and you're not politically toxic. So politicians are more willing to actually engage with you to get your votes, and they're more willing to actually do really cool things, like give more subsidies to Beyond Meat, or maybe outlaw factory farming. I don't know. I think this is really cool, guys. This probably already gets their impacts in the future, and I'll weigh on impacts later. Now, why do I think OG is, like, actually, first point, on manifestation. OG does not prove this is going to be done well.
Why?
It won't be. No. I'll take closing soon, though. Don't worry. You guys are locked out. I don't care. OG does not prove this is going to be done well. It won't. These people do not have arms training. The average animal activist has no idea how to throw a Molotov cocktails. These people these people do not have any experience in actually using arms. What this means is that they probably use these quite badly, and this probably inherently raises the risk of bad things happening in the first place. Like, there's, like, what Ashlyn says. Like, yeah, there probably is a high chance an animal fucking dies because some idiot just, like, threw a bomb wrong or something. Or someone actually accidentally just, like, harmed an animal because they weren't sure how this equipment worked in the first place. They also don't have the funding to train people with arms, because what? Like, most of these people have no experience. No, like here, this probably makes the movement look way worse, especially internally. Because at the point in which your own movement now starts accidentally killing animals in their, like, fucking, like, little adventure to free the factory farms, you have a lot less people who actually want to continue the fucking, bombing of the factory farms that OG claims is their end impact. So, yeah. Second, I think this also probably looks worse elsewhere. But this probably also helps our point on perception. Because if you're accidentally killing factory, like, fucking farm animals, this probably looks really bad to the average person. So, but on perception here, and I want to engage with this charitably, we say that people heavily dislike political violence. OG says, OG says, like, yeah, people care about these issues, and spectacle is uniquely the way that you actually get engagement. And I want to weigh on this here. First, again, they never prove why. Like, I think you can get spectacle, even if it's less and less gruesome, insofar as you do protests that raise awareness for this. But second, the narratives of peaceful protests, and the risk of violence are inherently much more powerful, because their case, again, only works for the people who support their who absolutely support their movement. This does not work for the average animal activist supporter who probably still has who significantly buys into the narrative of peaceful protest in the first place, and this definitely doesn't work to the average person who, flat out, yeah, I buy there's more vegans than ever, but, like, the average person still eats meat, guys. They're not gonna think this is really cool. CG. Cool. I think the animal activists who exist still can do protests. I still think there are more vegans now than ever. I don't know. I think this means that you probably are able to leverage more people. And so far as there's a big group, there's much easier, and the group is not politically toxic, which you need to reckon with, Anya. It's probably much more likely you get buy-in in the first place from politicians who want to do the really cool things you talk about. Awesome. So I want to flag here what this means for finally, I want to flag again. Politicians are majoritarian. They don't want to support politically toxic things. And if you look like you're extreme and you bomb a factory, they're going to want to distance yourself from your movement as far as the main image that sticks out in your movement. Because again, OG's talking about spectacle. The spectacle is going to be sticking out the most within your movement. And so now this is what your movement looks like. Politicians are going to want to stay away from this, just in case you really, really don't buy this. So I think this means you get a lot less change on their side. So, weighing on impacts here. We say you get more political change long-term, and that's really based. OG says you get less animal deaths short-term, and that's really based. Why weigh us over OG? Because long-term political changes probably scale upwards. Like, if we raise the subsidies for Beyond Meat and more people are become vegan overall, which they probably don't do when the vegan movement looks insane on their side, this probably means over in the future, and scaling to the future, less people eat meat, there's less of a need for factory farming. When you have any short-term deaths, insofar as they don't stem the reasons why people eat meat in the first place, probably are useless. Also, they probably also kill animals anyways. It also harms the vegan movement's ability to actually create more change in the future. So I think we're able to win on this class. You should probably prioritize political change, and I think I think insofar as the vegan movement has the potential to do other cool things, they lose their political power to do this. This is really, really bad. Proud to oppose.